Testing 1, 2.
I hereby call the City of Lloydminster Governance and Priorities Committee meeting for June 14th, 2021 to order. As we take a moment of silent, personal reflection, I'd just like to mention and bring to everyone's attention that if you weren't aware, a member of the RCMP gave his life on the weekend just outside of Indian Head, Saskatchewan, and I would like us to keep that in mind too as we take that moment of personal reflection. I think our RCMP officers, firefighters, emergency medical services, military, do what they do each and every day, and they do it to the best of their ability. On some days, that ability may come to an end, and just like to recognize Constable Patton's contribution and keep his family and the members of the force in mind going forward, because this plays and lays heavy on many hearts. So with that, let's take that silent moment of personal reflection. As a reminder, all members of council are obligated to declare a conflict of interest or a pecuniary interest as per section 133 of the Lloydminster Charter regarding any item on this agenda. This meeting is for discussion and information gathering only. All decisions will occur during regular council meetings. We thank all of our presenters at this time for their presentations. Moving on to item number 2, approval of agenda. I'll look for direction from council. Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was wondering if I could actually just add an item to the agenda under 5.5, and we'll call it Acknowledging Traditional Territory.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I could make
I'll
the
look
motion.
for direction
Yeah.
for an amended. Yeah.
I move that the agenda dated June 14th, 2021 be approved as amended.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Buckingham, thank you very much. Any further discussion on the amended agenda motion? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving on to item number 3, approval of the previous meeting minutes. Look for direction. Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. I move that the Governance and Priorities Committee minutes dated May 10th, 2021 be approved.
Thank you. Look for a seconder. Councillor Whiting, thank you very much. Any further discussion on those minutes and the motion? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving on to item number 4, and I'll look to the city manager.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. For item 4.1, Museum Relocation Update, I will ask Natalie Clydesdale and Leo Perry to present.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council.
Good afternoon, Natalie. Welcome.
I'm just going to be presenting information on the museum relocation update and exhibit development. Any questions regarding the community engagement piece of the report? I just ask that we ask Communications Director Leo Perry for any information on that. In the late 2019, City Council accepted the Community Facilities Assessment Report, which outlined that the serviceable lifespan of the LCSC had concluded. In July 2020, the LCSC building was closed to the public with permanent exhibits decommissioned shortly thereafter. On September 28, 2020, City Council approved a 10-year lease agreement which allowed construction of a new facility to commence at 4207 44th Street. In March 2021, City Council awarded the contract for the exhibit design and fabrication to Panther Creative of Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. Design of the exhibit has begun. There are 5 dedicated exhibit zones: Journey of the Bar Colonists, Settlement of the Lloydminster and Area, Domestic Life, Agriculture, and the Oil Industry. Other elements that will be included in the design are local Indigenous reconciliation efforts to the Heart of Treaty 6 Reconciliation Circle and providing visitors an opportunity to reflect on the community today. I hope that's better. Furniture has been tendered out and will include office furniture, studio tables and chairs, a modular reception desk, and mobile archives shelving. Administration has also begun to work to open the Weaver Heritage Park, which consists of the outdoor displays and buildings. The park will be open for viewing on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays throughout the months of July and August. Admissions will be by donation and tracked by reception staff located at the former Saskatchewan Tourism Building. The City of Lloydminster launched a formal public engagement campaign between March 1st and 22nd, 2021. Due to COVID-19, engagement tactics were adjusted to ensure resident safety and social distancing was maintained. Key stakeholder groups consisted of the Bar Colony Heritage Society, the Richard Larson Bar Colony Foundation, Friends of the Lloydminster Regional Archives, and the Lloydminster Potters Guild. Public online engagement options were also promoted to ensure all residents of Lloydminster had an opportunity to learn about the project and share input. Through these consultations, 122 surveys, 2 resident emails, and 12 stakeholder workbook submissions were submitted. In total, 629 individuals viewed the project webpage, 242 were informed and viewed at least one document or engagement tool, and 122 participated in the engagement activities. Primary themes that emerged from the engagement data emphasize the following priorities: preserving and recognizing local history, encouraging creativity and showcasing artwork, fresh and interactive exhibits, and enhanced youth involvement. The city will utilize the engagement findings in planning for future programs and services. The feedback is also supporting administration in the development of new brand identity and the Lloydminster Museum and Archives. So the objective is to provide the committee with an update on the relocation of the LCSC and design and fabrication of the new permanent exhibit at the LCSC. The options are that the committee accept this report as information, that the committee request more information, that the item be brought forward for a future regular council meeting for decision, and that the committee request more information, and that the item be brought forward to a future Government and Priorities Committee meeting. This item is in alignment with the following strategic area of long-range cultural facility planning: the creation of a permanent exhibit with a minimum lifespan of 10 years, focusing on local and regional historical literacy. The Lloydminster Museum Relocation Project has approved budget of $1.5 million. Current estimate costs are identified in the following table, with $298,315 allocated to the permanent exhibit design and build. So I open it to any questions regarding the relocation.
Thanks, Natalie. Questions, comments from council? Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks, Natalie, for that. Good to see that things are progressing along there, and I'm sure everybody's excited, especially you've had a large part in getting through all of this stuff and getting us to where we are. I had a couple questions that are kind of related, and just because you're here, I'm going to ask them. The original house that's on the hill behind there, is there any, is it ever going to be open again? Lots of people have asked me about that, the Rendell house and everything that's there. Is it part, you can't get to it, or can you get to it as part of that outdoor exhibit area?
Rendell House will be open this summer. I think you're
Oh, sorry, Weaver, yeah,
the Weaver
House.
also known
Yes.
as the Tea House. Yes, the Weaver House will not be open this year, simply because it hasn't been staged and it does have some maintenance issues with it. So we are working towards bringing that up to a quality that where we can open up to the public. It just will not be open this year.
Yeah, it's a neat piece of history. If you've never been in there, it'd be nice if we had those outdoor displays going that you could get into there as well, so.
One day.
Yeah, like everything, we'll get there, right? Good, thanks.
Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just from the engagement side of things, is there anything that stood out to you that surprised you, I guess, so far from what you've seen? Because a lot of the things that I saw in there, to me, were pretty well perfectly reasonable in the way I would expect them to be, talking a lot about our local history, our local culture and things like that. But was there anything that stood out to you?
From my perspective, a lot of it was practical feedback, feedback that we've heard from before from the public. A lot of it, again, was circulation of the collection, a permanent dedicated history display. And that's what we're currently doing. There was a lot of advocacy for local art as well, so we have to incorporate that into our temporary or traveling exhibits as well, and support other local art initiatives through consignments, programs, and other services.
Natalie, one of the items that certainly is of interest from my perspective is, will the schools be able to tour? Now, I know we're still waiting to get through COVID and phase 1, 2, and 3 with the Saskatchewan government, but will the grounds be available through the schools, working with yourself and the team at the museum to have access after September 1st on a school tour, as an example, versus just being open to the public? Has that been looked at all so that we can get our youth back into our museum as well?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. The plan is to welcome schools back when field trips are permitted. As we move forward in this exhibit, we are taking youth into consideration, making sure that the information that we are including in the exhibit development isn't too advanced or too complex for the average, guest or class field trip. We also will be building out curriculum objectives through education programs. So we are welcoming back a museum programmer next week, and that's what they're going to be doing throughout the summertime, is developing interactive guided tours and education programs that build upon the exhibit that's going to be located in the gallery.
Terrific, because I think that's a very key point in my discussions with people about having schools access it and give them that first flavor of their experience of history that they won't get from a textbook, physically, and seeing it, in some cases, touching that cold steel, as they refer to it as, and things like that. So that's terrific, great.
Thank you.
Councillor Buckingham.
Thanks, Your Worship. I had one more question. It appears as though we're coming in nicely under budget. Any surprises you think that are still looming, and has the relocation project hit any snags like other projects as far as getting things done, and what's our expected opening date if everything goes well?
We're hoping to still be open in the fall. It entirely comes down to the exhibit itself has not entered production or fabrication stage as of yet. There is still the concern that materials procurement could impact that timeline, so we are prepared for that as well. I've spoken to Panther Creative, the vendor that's designing it, to see if we can try and start fabrication before design is fully finished. There are structures that we've determined that are going into the exhibit in order to get a head start on materials procurement.
So still a possibility, but things are looking okay to this point.
Yes, there's nothing so far that is causing any concern.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Diachuk, followed by Councillor Thorson.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. I guess, Natalie, I had a couple of conversations with people in the community around the reopening, and there's a lot of excitement, and their excitement not only about the museum, but the library, and sort of having that renewed focus, and really looking forward to seeing what's going to go on, and what's going to happen, what things are going to be retained, whatever it is. So I think that's good news for us as well. I mean, I think I read it in here. I just can't remember. I haven't read this here since a couple of days ago. But again, the inclusion, I know there's been conversation about including the implications for First Nations and the impact of it on our community as well. And I think there's reference in there as well. And I think that as you look at the efforts being made by the school divisions, the college, and other groups in the community, hiring the Hot 6 or Hard at Treaty 6 worker it's anticipated being there, I think speaks well for the community and direction. So thank you for that, and I guess in the efforts, I'm certain that you were involved in that as well. So I'm really looking forward to that and seeing the next step in this whole process for us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I apologize, it's not really a question, it's more just a comment generally. Just again, you know, this update gives us another opportunity to be excited about this because, you know, this is nothing against what the old product was, but all I could say is that I'm really excited for what the new product that, you know, our residents are going to be able to go to visit, that people from out of town are going to be able to come to and visit and see, you know, what is Lloydminster all about, what is their history, what is some of the neat artifacts that we have laying around and things like that. So I'm excited about it. You know, dollar-wise and everything, to me, I'm still really happy with the route that we took, and that we actually decided finally once and for all to let that other building go and to move in this direction, because it's going to be a product that's going to improve quality of life for people. So I'm excited about it, and thank you for what you're doing for helping to facilitate getting that good product out there for people to be able to see. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Marin.
Thank you, Your Worship. I knew I had a question in here somewhere. So when I was reading your report, I noticed that you talked about enhanced youth involvement, and that was around the engagement sessions that you did. But are you looking at having some youth volunteerism opportunities at the museum, or just more youth programming, or youth investing in or informing what the museum exhibits look like?
There's definitely opportunity to create partnerships within the community, especially around temporary exhibits. There is a 1,400 square foot space that we will be also developing not only our own displays and exhibits, but also creating partnerships, which we've done in the past, especially with the LPSD. And there's opportunities to also partner with the Youth Council, youth volunteers, and help have their voice represented within the cultural facility. So yes.
Great, thank you. And so just I want to plant that little seed around the youth volunteerism piece. We're always looking for ways to engage youth in community and provide them with opportunities to volunteer in their passion areas. So the museum might fit that bill really nicely.
Thank you, Councillor.
Do you have another question, Councillor Buckingham? Nope, you're good. Anyone else, comments or questions? Well, Natalie, I think you've seen the excitement around this table. I'm sure you're feeling it in the community. They're certainly excited about what's coming and looking forward to it. It'll be great to open up the Weaver Park to have people be able to enjoy it this summer once restrictions lift and move forward. So keep up the great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Your Worship. Council?
With that, I will move to City Manager for 4.2.
Thank you, Your Worship. For 4.2, Downtown Business Redevelopment Committee, terms of reference, I will ask Jana Rowe to come forward and present. While Jana's coming up, Jana's relatively new to the city. She comes to us from Lac-La-Biche County and former that, the Fort Saskatchewan area. So Jana's been a great asset to our team, so I want to welcome her.
Good morning, Your Worship and Council.
Hello, Jana, welcome.
So today I am here to present to you the terms of reference for the Business Downtown Redevelopment Committee. The Downtown Redevelopment Plan, of course, was done, and from that we understand that there's construction for roads, infrastructure, public space, events. That all needs to be done, and there's, of course, an action plan on how to get it done. And that's going to hopefully revive our downtown and make it a showpiece for Lloydminster. The committee's purpose is to bring together a cross-section of community interest groups, business stakeholders, and individuals to work together with the City of Lloydminster to coordinate the implementation and execution of that plan. Now, some of the objectives will define a little bit more what they're actually going to do, because of course we don't want them going out and building a road. So with the objectives, it would be to review and determine the course of action and how to prioritize the DARP, or the Downtown Area Redevelopment Plan, from an implementation standpoint, and provide that back to administration and council accordingly to make sure that they're in line and they have that voice at the table. The committee would also work to improve the downtown experiences in Lloydminster, and I do believe that it's important to reassess the progress of the committee at least every 3 years. And then, of course, to report back to executive leadership and council about what's going on. The committee structure, if you guys would have noticed, is much larger than what would normally be considered a good committee structure. And the reason for that is to cover the broad sector of stakeholders in the downtown area. The other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is that the committee would be formed by an application process. So we would take applications and review them and select the committee members that way according to the seats that are reflected in the terms of reference.
Back to me.
Back to you, Mr.
Thank you. Council, any questions or comments? I'll start with Councillor Whiting and with Councillor Buckingham.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify, I guess, that the committee structure has all those shall be comprised of the following representations. So is the plan is to have one, as it's listed there, one from each of those organizations, and so basically include a total of 15 committee members, or is it smaller than that?
That's the intention, Mr. Mayor, to
Yes.
Councillor Whiting's question there. That is the intention, is that it would have the representation, including 4 business representatives from the downtown area.
So a
it would be
15
a large committee of 15.
would be a large committee, okay. Yep, I'm just going to stew on that for a little bit and
Okay.
pass it along.
Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. Welcome, Jenna. Thanks for everything. Have we had a lot of feedback come through the office since the DARP was actually done to this point, with people saying, boy, I sure like to be a part of that? Have we got a bunch of people that are stepping up already, that are waiting to put their application in? Do you think the process is going to be fairly smooth? Is there good community engagement from people that want to be a part of this initiative?
So, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Buckingham's question, I've only been here since the end of March. I can tell you that as I've engaged with businesses, there has been a lot of reception as far as they want to see the downtown revitalized, both in the downtown core and out of the downtown core. So I would say there is pretty good engagement. There has also been some negative comments about it, but overall, it's been pretty positive.
So we should have no problem filling the committee structure to this level. You'll have more applications than you have seats around the table, would be the feeling you have to this point.
To this point, that would be the feeling. I do think that we will need to do a lot more engagement to make sure that we have each area represented.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting number of different areas there, and we have one from this and one from that and 4 from this. You know, striking that balance of the right people around that table, I think is probably going to be a bit of a challenge to make sure that that committee is set up the way that we want to run it, and that everybody feels they've got they're able to put their mark on that and be a part of it. So I'm excited to hear that, because you do hear the negative comments. Why are we spending money on redeveloping a dying downtown, and all the negative things that go along with it, and then the positive things about, wow, we've got some really good things going on downtown and some great improvements, and this is going to make it even better. So hopefully we can get to that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I've got Councillor Torres and then Councillor Diachuk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just generally on the overall terms of reference, we have to both be careful and excited about this. One is careful is, you know, we went from a system, you know, in terms of the history of having the streetscapes or downtown bid, and we don't want to create a new downtown bid. I'm really hoping that's not the point of this. The point is more to put some of those plans into action. Start taking the low-hanging fruit and getting those champions who want to make it happen and getting them in the same room so they can start actually, you know, figuring out what downtown events we're actually going to do and where we're going to do them and how that's going to work. You know, coordinating sidewalk sales, things like that with the downtown areas to try and drive people into the downtown. Getting everyone on the same page as far as, you know, general upkeep and having a general, you know, way of looking at the downtown, because there's a vested interest for all those groups. So having them on the same page and having representatives from those groups is great. But on the other hand, we don't want to just recreate the bid where there's no budget, no ability to do anything, and it's about money that it ends up being, and then they can't do anything. But then on our side, on City Council, we also have to be mindful of that and actually get some budget allocated to those important underground works that have to happen before we can get to the next step. Because, you know, I'm a firm believer that, you know, when we talk about economic development and business retention strategies, getting a nice, healthy, working downtown that people want to visit is an important part of that. Especially if a bypass ever happens in the city, we need to actually attract people into the city. And having them getting to our downtown, you know, is an important part of that for our tourism over ever, if ever we're bypassed. So I think that this is a great start. Whether, you know, hopefully we get all the right people who really want to be champions of the cause and not necessarily, you never know what you're going to get on any board, I guess, is the point. And you want to get the board that wants to champion people to come to downtown. Which does mean dealing with some of the warts, if there are some, for sure. That I'm not trying to say that that's not important, but, you know, it's just important that we get the people who already want to make it happen and give them a little bit of clout to be able to, as a group, start saying these are the things we're going to make happen within our mandate. So, no, I think it's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Diachuk.
Yeah, thanks, and welcome home, and good to have you. So I'm going to take just a bit of what Councillor Torres said and maybe try to just compartmentalize it a little bit. I think it's important for members of this committee to know that they're not there to reinvent the DARP, but to implement it. And I think that needs to be front and center in the whole process so that people don't feel like somehow they have to go in and now you're going to ask me what my views are and I want to recreate it. And their view is important, but it's important to note that it's more about the implementation as opposed to the design. So yeah, you get to be part of it and roll it out and maybe be involved in some of the prioritization. But the plan is set, and so as people apply, I guess the piece that I would want to know is how aware are you of the plan? How committed are you to the plan? What pieces of it do you think you can contribute to it? And if we're just, you know, bringing people on because they happen to tick a box, I'm not comfortable with that. And I understand you start with the plan and you work from there. The other piece I guess I would ask, is to look at your different social services providers. If you had 3 and then there was possibly one can be the open whatever. But as I look at the breadth of the representation, the other piece for me is that I don't want to recreate the bid, as Councilor Torres has said as well, but strike a balance and understanding that the development of the downtown does include those social agencies, I think and what's trying to be brought forward in this terms of reference. But I really would want to have people in there that potentially are business owners in the community down there, and we got 4 of them down there, and I'm hoping that they're all gung-ho and ready to go. So we're kind of trying to tell you how to do the job without getting into the weeds, and yet here we are doing that. And so to back out of it, I think the most important part is this is about implementing the plan and then getting people who understand it and are committed to it, and making sure, because otherwise it'll stall. But this is about time, and because we were, as council, I think it was probably our second meeting, and there was discussion of a DARP, and it got postponed, and yet here we are now 5 years later, roughly. We actually have a plan, and we're getting people to make it happen, so it's good news.
Councilor Marion.
Thank you, Your Worship, and Jana, welcome. I've been looking forward to the day that you would join us in council chambers. So I'm a new councillor, and this is my first look at I've looked at the DART, but this is the first time it's come to council since I've been on council, and so I know about the downtown bid and some of the challenges there, but what I wanted to just kind of make sure that, and both Councillor Diachuk and Torsen have kind of talked about it, but those social determinants of health, that we're really looking at some parallel work that goes alongside of the DARP work, so that we're addressing some of those social concerns at the same time that we're starting to create a vibrant downtown community. And so I was very happy to see that you had some social service providers on there. I wondered about protective services, if there isn't a role for them to play on this committee. And there was one other thing, and just that engagement of the RCMP or protective services within the city to kind of do some of that linkage between the work that's happening in terms of the social determinants as well as this committee structure. So I'm excited about this. I hear a lot about it when I'm downtown, and I get a lot of messages on Facebook from people who live or work downtown or own businesses there, that when is this happening? So this is very exciting to see this move forward, and know that you have good support here.
Any other comments or questions? Jenna, you've brought one forward, as you've heard. This has got some history from previous council, today's council, and I think the whole downtown, and be it the bid, be it streetscapes, a lot of history. I like to say it's a rose. It's got its great sides, and then there were some prickly spots instead of the warts that Councilor Torsen referred to, but I'll go with the prickly spots. I think that it's great to see a wide selection. The one comment I would like to add under the Downtown Area Redevelopment Committee shall, I would like to see assist, coordinate, and execute the plan as directed by the city. So again, Councillor Diachuk and Councillor Torsen did a great job of mentioning that the plan's there. How do we help people and give them the tools as council through that committee to help assist the city? Because this is going to take everybody, and we've talked about this over and over again. The businesses can't do it alone. The residents can't do it alone. The city can't do it alone. There is a process, and helping them understand that process, having the DARP as a framework to follow, determining we know the short, medium, and long-term requirements. It's just a matter of tackling them as best as we can. And at the end of the day, it's always about the budget. Boy, that comes back to haunt us each and every time. Where's the money come from? So, I look forward to seeing you bring forward a committee, if that's the wishes of council, and get things started and get people talking about it. Because when there's talk, there's usually action. And if we can engage people and help put those energies to work, that'll be terrific. So you've got a good project ahead of you on this one, that's for sure. And I know you're up for a challenge, so. Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. I would echo Councillor Marion's comments. You never got the chance to really answer, though, to see if there was an opportunity for our protective services and an RCMP engagement. You never got the chance to actually reply before we carry on.
My apologies.
Your Worship, to Councillor Buckingham's question. Yes, I am glad to answer that. So in the terms of reference, we do have a space there where we say we will bring in other city administration and resources as needed. And that is one that would definitely be brought in, probably not for the entire length of the committee, but on an as-needed basis.
Yeah, I think, right off the bat that they could possibly provide some much valued input and experience with things down there as we move the plan forward. So I think that's very key.
Thank you very much, Councillor, for bringing that up. Any other questions or comments? All right.
Thank you, Your Worship. One of the other things I wanted to mention is just because, and I'm not handpicking anything like that, but I know that there's members of the community that don't necessarily have any vested interest. And I can just appreciate that there's an open spot in there because some of the champions of our downtown don't necessarily have a tie to it. And I still think it's important to get some of those people who are really passionate about it, who I know, if they had a little bit of clout and ability to do it, they would take the plan and run with it. And that's really what we need to do. We have to just acknowledge that there's people who are willing to do the work and ready to do the work. Let's just give them the plan and let them do some of the work. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Any other questions or comments? Jana, I guess the question I'd ask is what's the next steps from your perspective now that you've presented to council?
So, Mr. Mayor, the next steps would be that we would bring it to council as a formal RFD or request for your decision to put it into a formal committee, and then we would hopefully do this before the end of summer, and then we would recruit during the summer months and have it established as of September.
Okay, terrific. Is there any plans from your perspective, and I can look to the economic development team total, with the restrictions coming off, and this, I know it's hard to plan things because we believe we have a date, things are moving forward, but is there anything planned for the 2 months until September in the downtown once July 11th rolls around?
I can tell you right now, Mr. Mayor, that there is one group that is looking at doing an event downtown and working through what the restrictions will be and whether it'll be possible.
Absolutely, and I think that's the greatest challenge I'm sensing in the community today is how much energy do you put into at what point until we get the final green light, as they say, and it's not a cautionary light and a green light, because to put the energy into putting into an event like, be it the car show, be it the downtown market for a day and closing the street. We've had some great events, but we want to make sure we can get people there, they feel safe, and people want to put the energy into organizing it. So thank you for that. Any other questions? Last call. Thank you very much, Jana.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Moving on to number 5, governance and priority matters. 5.1, I'll look to the city manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. For 5.1, Drainage Bylaw number 15-2021, I will ask Karen De La Rosa to come up and present.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council.
Good afternoon, Karen.
So before you today is the information report on the Drainage Bylaw 15-2021, which incorporates the proposed amendments to the existing sewer use bylaw. So just a little bit of a background. The sewer use bylaw was adopted in 2013 to regulate the use of the sanitary and storm sewer systems. The intent of the bylaw is to protect the environment by mitigating the discharge of harmful pollutants into the system. It also is intended to protect the public and our staff, and to protect our infrastructure from damage and reduction in expected useful life. The sewer use bylaw is also intended in assisting us to maintain our regulatory compliance. Regulating discharge into the storm and sanitary systems is critical to ensure that our processes are able to meet our discharge requirements, which is mandated by the Saskatchewan Water Security Agency. The photos on your, you can go back. The photos on your right there were taken at the wastewater treatment plant during a heavy crude event. So the new wastewater treatment facility, which is set to be operational in 2023, will be built with process controls to mitigate the impact of these heavy crude events. However, it's important that we make all the efforts needed to mitigate these events at the source, and lessen our risk of non-compliance and also avoid costly biological reseeding and maintenance costs of our systems. So the sewer use bylaw forms the enforcement framework of the pollution prevention program. The pollution prevention program regulates what businesses can put down the drain. Currently, the bylaw provides us authority to conduct facility inspections, sampling of effluent, and impose a surcharge if needed. So we test specific parameters, which is listed at the last bullet point there. These parameters are also parameters that are regulated by the Water Security Agency as per our permit to operate. So why is a new bylaw needed? So the existing bylaw currently does not provide us the required authority or mechanisms to enforce the pollution prevention program in the way that it's intended and needed. Currently under our bylaw, our program is implemented through education and facility inspection, which will result into an inspection report. From that inspection report, we will complete a discharge sampling, and if the discharge is exceeding the bylaw limits, we enter into a surcharge agreement with the business owner, and the business owner is responsible for the fines or the surcharges associated with the bylaw. So this model that we currently have on the bylaw is based on the discharge quality sampling. However, not all businesses or establishments within city limits have the infrastructure to help us implement the bylaw under this current model. So enforcement is an issue in certain cases when infrastructure for discharge sampling is not available. So on these two photos here, these are two similar industries. The photo on your left is a business that has a manhole on their sanitary sewer system. So we're able to sample their discharge and enforce the bylaw if needed. The business on your right does not have a manhole on their sanitary service, therefore we're not able to sample their discharge. So bylaw enforcement is a challenge on the business on the right. So the proposed bylaw, for the proposed bylaw amendment, we're proposing to include a name change to drainage bylaw to incorporate both storm and sanitary sewer systems. The new drainage bylaw has three components, which is the education, implementation, and enforcement. So we will continue our commitment on education. The main intent of this bylaw is not about the surcharges and fees. The intent of this bylaw is to help bring people into compliance. So we've also adopted new codes of practice which will help businesses be in compliance with the bylaw. On the implementation piece, we will sample the discharges when we can. However, in areas where we can't sample, we will be using facility inspections to verify compliance. On the enforcement piece, although our focus is on education and helping people be in compliance with the bylaw, we also want to have an equitable utility. So businesses or industries who are adding more strain to the system needs to cover the cost associated with treating extra strength effluent or extra strength discharges. So just a little bit more in depth on those three key pieces. So on the education piece, as we mentioned earlier, we remain committed on the education piece. We will be in partnership with our communications and marketing team. We intend to conduct more public engagement to educate the public on the pollution prevention program. We will also be conducting more facility visits or drop-ins, and in these drop-ins, we will be utilizing these drop-ins to let people know why we do what we do and how they can help to be in compliance. We are also intending to implement codes of practice. So these are best practices specific to industries. So we have developed 12 industry-specific codes of practice, which will help industries gain more knowledge and ideas on how they can be in compliance of the bylaw. On the implementation piece, as we mentioned earlier, we'll sample where we can, and in areas where sampling isn't possible, we will verify compliance with facility inspections. We have divided the facility inspection in phases based on the risk that the industry poses to our wastewater treatment system. So on our phase 1, we had identified commercial and industrial sumps because there's a huge risk in terms of crude oil events in coming into the facility and also impacting our treatment process. We will also be implementing discharge permitting. So we will be developing requirements for the public to apply for a discharge permit before they can discharge, say, water from a storm pond into our storm sewer system. And this will help us be more informed about what's going into our system and ensure that what is being discharged to our system is meeting regulatory requirements. So these photos that you have before you are actual inspection photos from local businesses. And with this amendment to the bylaw, what we are hoping to do is that there would be more actionable items to these issues, whether or not we have infrastructure in place to do discharge monitoring. So on the enforcement piece, like we said earlier, although our focus is on education, we're also intent on ensuring that we have an equitable utility. So businesses who are adding more strain to the system needs to cover the costs associated with treating extra strength effluent or extra strength discharge. So we will be implementing new fines for non-compliance found during facility inspections. Additional provisions on the bylaw, we had also included provision to have authority to discontinue provision of services if the discharge has risk to the environment or risk to our sanitary or stormwater systems. We had also included a provision to mandate an access point to the sanitary system service if necessary. And other things that we have included is a simplified language. So we have simplified the language in the bylaw to make enforcement a little bit easier. And we have also engaged a couple of departments in terms of developing this bylaw and also developing processes going forward. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Karen. Questions, comments? Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. I'm not going to tell you this doesn't make me really nervous, because we've had dealings in the past with multiple businesses in town that have really brought stuff to our attention as council that they felt it wasn't fair. I'm all for the environment and making sure we're doing our part, but the biggest thing for me is that it was fair to all concerned in this regard, because we've had those comments come forward. You know, one in particular saying, this isn't coming from my place, yet I'm getting hammered with this, right? You know, permitting, are we adding more fees? Are we adding more red tape to get this extra permitting? Is that going to delay things? Is it going to cost people more money? You know, I didn't get out of the report what that permit would look like, as far as what that would look like to the end user for the buildings or the properties. You know, how are we going to identify the issues? Exactly where are they coming from, and making sure that that is done fair across the board. And the last thing that I was concerned about was the actual enforcement of it. Right? I think it's a large undertaking to try and figure this out and to make sure that that enforcement is done as a last resort. I think I can't say that strong enough. The enforcement's done as a last resort, because the other comments that we've gotten in the past is that the hammer came down really quickly without the proper time frame. So, you know, we talked about in here, in your report, you got engagement and community, you know, public feedback and everything else. You know, I don't want to see a bunch of our local restaurants or places like that having fines slapped on them right off the hop here, and making sure that we give ample time, because if they have to change things, that's going to come with an expense already, right? I get that it has to happen, but it makes me really nervous that we're trying to strike the balance between proper environmental procedure and proper ways to maintain our infrastructure, and yet not impeding business to the point where we become a hindrance or a nuisance to that aspect. So I think it's a really delicate one, and we're going to get a lot of feedback and pushback on this, I'm sure, about it. So, you know, handling it with kid gloves a little bit, I think, is the basics of what I wanted to say on this, because this isn't going to go without feedback, guaranteed.
Sure. And yeah, if Councillor Buckingham, if I can address some of those points. So in terms of fairness, the discharge monitoring that we currently do, the discharge has to absolutely come from the business itself. That's why we're changing how we're implementing the bylaw, because in some businesses that cannot be done if they do not have an access point that allows us to positively determine that that discharge is coming from the businesses. We won't sample. So we're trying to implement this as fairly as we can. However, like I mentioned, there's some businesses who doesn't have that infrastructure, and we're hoping to address that through the fines and surcharges. And like you said, this is only a last resort. In terms of the permitting structure, there's also regulatory requirements from a federal and provincial level in terms of discharging into the sanitary and the stormwater system specifically. So we will be implementing some of those. There's already an informal process that we have implemented to ensure that when we're allowing discharge into our stormwater systems, it's meeting CCME requirements. I definitely hear you though on the red tape and making sure that it's a seamless and easy process for everybody, but there's an education component to that piece at the same time. So, and on I guess the enforcement piece, like you said, it will be our last resort. Our focus on this bylaw is the education. In some businesses, we have worked with them 3 years before we actually impose a fine. And the only time that we would impose a fine is that if we're not seeing any improvement, or if we're not seeing any effort to improve their practices or improve their discharge. So last resort is an enforcement, and we're trying to utilize that more of as an encouragement to be in compliance of the bylaw and not being as a hammer. So.
Yeah, I don't want to see any more red tape when it comes to this stuff. These businesses they have enough to go through without us adding another level. And like you said, that enforcement piece is a last bit. I know there are a few restaurants in town that have put some systems in. Now, I'm curious, does this meet the requirement? I know one in particular that has bought a product that actually treats the grease, and it's available, and you can get it as a dispenser system, or you can add it just by the bottle or whatever, and people can use it in their house even. Is using a product like that acceptable as a discharge?
It depends, Councillor, on what type of product they're using. So if they're using an enzyme-based product, it increases the biological oxygen demand levels of the sewer or of the discharge. So it really depends. The other piece that we're really trying to relay to businesses is that it's not just about using a product, it's also about maintaining your system. So if they have a grease trap that can hold X amount of liters, if it's not getting checked on a regular basis, whether it's full or not, it's not really helping them out in terms of meeting compliance. So those are the pieces that we try to relay to them when we do our facility inspections and our facility visits, and educate them on how they can be in compliance of the bylaw.
Yeah, so when it comes to the communications piece, it's easy for us to go out and say, we're going to start doing this, right? But as we go to visit these businesses, has the city done its due diligence on the back end and maybe have some information to say, you know, here's some things that you can do, you know, that we can actually give someone to say, here's how you can get into compliance. You know, have we researched what the cheapest, easiest, best, you know, doesn't have to be the cheapest, but what's the best way for people to do that stuff? So we give them some information instead of just coming in and saying, you need to change this, it needs to be better, and not even telling them how.
For sure. So the code of practice actually is the answer to that question. We don't specifically prescribe a technology or a product, but we prescribe practices that can help them be in compliance. So one sample would be like checking the grease traps on a regular basis, say once a week, to make sure that there's enough space there to actually hold the grease and the grease doesn't go into their system. So we have developed 12 industry-specific best practice or code of practice for those businesses to help them out.
At the end of the day, everything we do in the city, we're in the customer service business.
For sure.
At the end of the day, right? So as our people are going in and doing these inspections, I want them to be courteous and professional and offer solutions, you know, as opposed to coming in with the hammer, right? So if we've got those things in place, I think it'll make the transition a little easier for people to understand. So I think, you know, not just putting out communications and education that way, education on site as that stuff comes out, I think is going to be very key.
Yeah, and that's the reason why we have updated the facility visits on the education piece, is that we want to have that face-to-face, COVID restriction pending, but face-to-face interaction with the businesses and really help them out on how they can be in compliance of the bylaw.
Good. I've taken up more than my share of time. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Buckingham. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, Councillor Thatcher.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I'm excited about this because I've had, you know, a couple people approach me because they had flooding in their basement and they got it cleaned out by the city and got a bill for cleaning it up, which is more than what the fine was. And in the end, they were not a business that had any grease or food products, and yet it was clogged up with grease. And then it happened again shortly thereafter. So therein lied the complaint, and it was resolved, and I never heard any more about it. So there's a couple elements around the fairness piece, because I think as we're venturing into this new wastewater treatment plant, my understanding is, listening to Executive Director Stang, is that some of these hydrocarbons get into those membranes and destroy them. There's a value of about $1 million in there for those membranes. So if we don't track down who's in fact putting this waste into there, who's on the hook for the cost? And frankly, every one of us in the city is on the hook, and we don't get the money just out of a bank account that belongs to the city. That comes from ratepayers and taxation. So I think in terms of fairness, I think the $500 fine is nothing. And I guess if we're able to track down the individual who is in fact releasing those chemicals and hydrocarbons or whatever it is that's destroying the membranes, they should be on the hook for the full cost of that, because that's just being totally irresponsible. And I think opportunity comes with responsibility in terms of the city. You have a responsibility to know the quality of your products, your WMIS sheets and all those other pieces, how to dispose of it. I don't think people are ignorant of any of those things when you're in the business of handling those products. So I'm assuming that if you're in that business, you should be aware of those products as well. And what we're talking about aren't things that people are doing on a daily basis, but they're doing on exceptionalities. So I appreciate the strategy that you've laid out in terms of awareness and education, but I don't think the fines are high enough, frankly, because the reality is that if you do this and it's an accidental thing and you report it, I mean, there's a $500 fine for not reporting. So you're not to get fined for that piece of it, but you need to be accountable for what you do that actually destroys and denigrates the quality of life within the city here. So I'm looking at those pieces and trying to balance out, you know, what's the responsibility of a business owner who does something that will damage, has the potential to damage our wastewater treatment plant that we're paying lots of money for, and the membranes are worth $1 million and they destroy it. Who's on the hook then? So we're not playing with $100 items or $1,000 items. We're playing with items that are $1 million and affect the quality of water in the city, North Saskatchewan River, and all our neighbors down the road. So I was looking for something with a little more teeth, frankly. I think, you know, the grease trap people and people that, you know, I don't know if we have a requirement now as part of our business licensing process, but if you are cooking and you have a kitchen, you know, good practice would suggest to me that you buy the grease trap and you have it available to you. I don't know whether we have it in our bylaws now at this point in time, Karen, and someone correct me, I didn't look it up, but all these other examples, I think we have a responsibility to maintain safety protocol. If people are doing it out of ignorance, you have those first two steps around awareness and education. If they're doing it because they want to cut costs, I have a problem with that, and I don't think the fines there are going to be substantive enough to correct behavior, because it might cost more to dispose of it properly than the $500 fine. So that's what I was looking for in there, because if the fine's intended to be a deterrent, is it going to act as a deterrent in some of those instances? So.
I believe, Councillor Diachek, that we do have provisions within the bylaw to recoup our cost.
Okay.
I can provide you that specific provision in the bylaw.
Okay. So if someone causes the membranes to go, we have the ability to recoup the $1 million.
Yeah. But I will provide you that specific provision. I don't know if City Clerk if there's a specific limit to that or not.
Councillor, in order to recoup some of these costs, we'd have to, the onus of proof would be on us to be able to prove that what they did, their actions caused a denigration of our systems. I think what Karen's mentioning, though, is very clearly our role here is to educate, mitigate, and then at the last end, if we have to enforce something, unless something is so egregious that enforcement would be the first step.
I've got Councillor Torres and then Councillor Whiting.
Thank you, Your Worship. First, I just had a question, and this is not nearly the most important thing that we're talking about within this, but why did we go with the term drainage, I guess, just as the name of the bylaw? Just because it is sanitary as well, right?
Yeah, that is correct. So it's sanitary and storm. So originally it was sewer use bylaw, but the bylaw in itself did talk about stormwater too at the same time. So we wanted it to be all encompassing both systems.
Okay, yeah, I just was curious, just because to me drainage is more
Runoff.
storm than the other, so it's back and forth. Doesn't really matter at the end of the day, a name is a name, so long as what's inside the content. To be honest with you, yeah, reading through this, I think the strategy that we're taking in terms of leading with public education and going the route we are with the way we're going to approach businesses, specifically as to what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, what are the right tools you need within your business. Will that potentially result in additional costs for them? Absolutely, but at the same time, for the most part, they should be already having those costs. They're already likely foregoing something that they ought to have. And so essentially, even as it stands right now for cleanup of what's going on, all taxpayers are paying for those issues that are happening. And, the Grease Beast did a great job, more so, I would say, to the residential customers of understanding what their role is as far as wastes down the drain. But, definitely the bigger problem is going to be the more industrial or more commercial-based businesses that are going to have the biggest effect on our system. So taking this approach and engaging with them and getting an understanding of where they're at and where they need to get to is going to be, great for the city in the long run, and money well spent as far as, not having to do the cleanup or not having to have more sophisticated systems down the road to be able to deal with the problem at the source. One other question I had, which is really only related specifically to maybe restaurants, is what role does public health have? Like, is there a role where public health, because generally they are doing all the health inspections and everything. So on grease traps and things like that, do they not have a role there as well that would need to be, that restaurant owners would need to kind of satisfy them?
I don't believe so, Councillor Torrenson, but I can check into that. But the grease trap is more of a maintenance issue than anything else. So I don't believe that there is
Okay.
anything within the public health.
Okay, but either way, I guess the point still stands that if you're not paying all the costs of doing business, then you're not doing business very well and you end up paying fines. And that happens in any line of business. If we had a trucking company that was going down residential roads that was overweight and with chains on, we would probably say that company needs to pay to fix it if we were able to prove that it was in fact them. The same should be said for if someone is, negligently putting things down the drain or purposefully, for sure. So anyway, thank you. But yeah, the tough part is definitely going to be enforcement, because the system is not necessarily designed at the time to ensure that there's all these different points where you can prove exactly where it came from. But anyway, thank you, and looks good so far.
Thank you.
Councillor Whiting, and then I'll come over to this side.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess just thinking of real-world situations here, and that first photo, that first slide on that shows the crude oil that was released into our system. Is that a recent activity? Is that?
I don't have the timestamp on this one, but it's something that occurs on a regular basis. So since January of this year, I believe we have had 8 events, not as huge as these events, where a slug of crude oil comes through, but it happens on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I guess that's where that's where my biggest concerns are, for those hydrocarbons that are going down the drains. And sometimes it's simply by accident because you do some sort of small cleaning in a service bay, a wash bay or something like that. I've worked in those places. And sometimes, I think it would be, cleaning out a big tank with a lot of hydrocarbons or something like that. And I see these photos, and I really am concerned about the cost to our city when something like this happens. And further to Councillor Diachuk's comments about, like, to be honest, you could probably put the crude oil down our city drains, and, it would cost 10 times less than what would happen if you spilled it on the banks of North Saskatchewan or something like that. So I think there is some serious repercussions that should be in place for events like this. And reading through this, I see that there are those inspection points that are to be installed if needed, or if a line changes or is installed. Now, I believe we had a real world situation here recently where there was a little bit of a spill or something come into our sewer, but there wasn't a defined, it come out of one of a handful of businesses on a line and couldn't be determined. In moving forward, if that comes up, do you automatically put an inspection point in place to help identify that next time? Or how do you rectify those situations when there has been a spill, but it has come from, you can't pinpoint who it's coming from?
So typically what we do in those situations is we try to backtrack. We inspect the specific businesses that are tied to that line upstream and downstream. We had a real-world situation where a business was discharging crude into the system. It was not deliberately, but their sump maintenance practices was allowing the discharge of that material into the system. If the business is able to and willing to work with us in improving that system, we probably will work with that for the first little bit, and if we're not seeing any improvement whatsoever, that's when we put in that inspection point to make sure that they are being responsible for what they're discharging into the system.
Yeah, no, that's good. I appreciate that, and further similar to what Councillor Buckingham said, was that there is a lot of education and working with our clients, our residents, to solve the problems first, but and sometimes when you see these pictures and this cost to the taxpayer because of negligence, it's hard to not want to rectify them very quickly with some deterrent of heavy fines or something like that. So I appreciate the input, and I'm happy with this.
And I guess, Councillor Whiting, if I can add to that too, so we have implemented this bylaw since 2013, and we actually have had businesses tell us that what they have implemented for a maintenance system is also helping them out. So they're no longer backing up because of grease blockage in their system. They're no longer spending thousands of dollars just to clean their sanitary service. So there's definitely some benefits on their end too, and that's something that we would relay again to them during facility inspections, just so they understand how it's benefiting them and it's also benefiting the city as a whole.
No, that's good to hear. I know that I'm assuming there has been some good work that has come out and some key indicators of good work that has come from things like the grease piece and the education that has gone forward to some of the, restaurants and those types of businesses as well too, and I'm sure the industrial areas as well. So that's good to hear. Thank you.
Councilor Merrick.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Karen. I always learn things when you come to present to us, things that I never knew I needed to know, so thanks for your presentation today. That picture of the grease collection container with the containment around it that was filled with grease, there was an overflow. So to me, that feels like it should be a public health issue as well as an environmental issue, and I hope that gets reported somehow. It could be an old one, but that shouldn't be right there in the middle. Is that a containment with grease overflowing?
I'm going to, Jason, to answer that.
I would think, yeah.
It is, okay.
Oil be
That was about 3 years ago, and it was a public health matter as well.
Okay, good. Because when Councillor Torreson said that, I was like, yes, that definitely should be. So thanks for that. I agree with Councillor Diachuk that the fines could or should be more significant. I think, when someone's putting something into the system and they're aware of what's happening, that those fines should be more of a user pay cost. One thing I didn't understand was around the manhole cost. You said something about putting a manhole in that you would have access to. And so would that be the business that pays the cost of that? And how significant is that?
Right now, we did include $60,000 in the budget to put manholes specifically on services that are problematic, so areas where we have had issues in the past. I guess that would still be up for discussion on whether it's a cost shared with the city or if it's going to be a city-funded 100%.
Yeah, I can chime in. Thanks, Your Worship, through Councillor. Within our capital budget, we did put some money in there as we were working through the wastewater treatment plant project and understanding the massive impact these types of things have on our system. There's some areas of the city where it's very difficult for our crew to go out and sample at specific locations, yet we feel we have a strong indication of where some of our most problematic issues are. So we put some money in the budget so that we could, from a city's perspective, go put a manhole or a sampling point on our side, on our infrastructure, so we could put our sampling devices down and get that collection. So those costs for that manhole or that sampling location would be city cost, and then essentially any fines or anything that comes out based on that sampling through this bylaw would be applied to the business owner.
Thank you for that. And one of the things I was thinking about on the fines was, the first fine is this much, and then if another occurrence happens within the year, it's this much, and if a third occurrence happens, and I wondered if that timeline shouldn't be shortened. And so we're giving people a whole year until that they get that higher fee. So just something to consider. And then I wondered, I like the approach around education and engaging with the community to make sure, the business owners, to make sure that they know what's available to them. But do we have the staff complement with the expertise to actually manage that and to do those investigations and that education?
Yes, we do, Councillor Marin. We do.
Okay.
We have one pollution prevention lead who looks after this program, and we also have 5 staff in wastewater collection that is well versed on the infrastructure we have underground to be able to determine where the material is coming from, if it can be determined. So.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Fagin.
Boy, good job on answering lots of questions there. My question's fairly simple. One of them is I'd like to know about flow monitoring. Exactly what is that? How do you measure that? So if you think you have a problem, or how do you identify where a problem may be, and when you do, how do you go and test that?
So in terms of flow monitoring, we'll have to check our usual suspects, and depending on what type of material is coming to the wastewater treatment plant. Say if we're seeing slugs of crude oil, we will typically check the industrial area. We'll check every single manhole that is tied to that specific line. So we typically pull up our map to see what the configuration looks like and what's upstream and downstream, and we do our investigation from there.
So it's not an automated,
No,
so
it's not
have we explored that side of things? There's devices out there that'll monitor almost anything.
Yeah.
And they're it's all micro stuff, and I'm just wondering,
Mm-hmm.
when you would actually have that, you would know that there has been a breach immediately and could pinpoint where that was. And I know that those costs have come down extremely in the last number of years, and
Yeah.
just wondering, Director.
Yeah, that could be a complex issue. I hear what you're saying. Once it's in the system, we would know it's coming down the line and those types of things. But typically, the way services work onto a main line, there's a large portion of businesses that are connected that don't have those samplings. So you'd almost need a sampler on each of the services to understand who's in excess or not. So I think it's a little more complex than just an automated. I do believe once we have a manhole in place, our sampler we can put in is automated, so that it's automatically pulling a sample every so minutes or every so long. But we need the infrastructure in some of those locations in order to put those samplers in so that we can do that. That gives us a better understanding too of like an area. So when we do see slugs, like Karen said, we do backtrack that. We check manholes and we work it back to an area. And then there's a contributing number of businesses that are potential contributors. Well, then you look at what does the business do? What are they in the business of? And you can kind of zero in on where the problematic areas are coming from and put the sampler there to test. So.
Yeah, no, certainly something to look at. That was in my old life, those types of monitoring devices, and yeah, they can save a lot of trouble. It takes a little bit as far as capital investment goes, but over time, that would make a difference. And just kind of curious, what would our largest fine be that we have given out? Any idea for something like that? And would they have used their insurance to pay that fine?
We have given out a quarterly surcharge of about $250,000 to a business, but that was under a surcharge agreement because the business was producing high TSS, high BOD effluent. So they I don't believe it was through. It was recovered through their insurance, but it was just, I guess, the cost of doing business. And if I can add to Executive Manager Stang's answer there about the flow monitoring point, we have actually looked into detection devices, like hydrocarbon detection devices, as part of the wastewater treatment plant project. The issue with them is reliability. So if you have a large pipe, if the device, if the hydrocarbon doesn't get in contact directly with the flow monitor or the monitoring device, it's not detected. So we've looked at it in detail, and we think that what we're currently doing now at this time would still be the most efficient way to do it at this time.
No, well, that's great. As long as you're looking into it, it'll be there one day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Dudchek.
Yep, yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Again, just to piggyback on Councillor Fagnan's thoughts, I mean, we know that that gas is lighter than water, and so it'll be closer to the top. On the other hand, the heavy crude's probably going to be sitting along the bottom, so I get a sense of that. Is it possible, once this bylaw comes forward, that we could have a comparator on what fines are in other cities relative to this area, or is this on par with what everybody else is doing, or are we low, are we high, or whatever it is?
A lot of cities have different fine structures, but we can definitely provide you some input on similar, I guess, similar programs.
Yeah, it'd just be interesting to have that comparison.
Thanks, Councillor. Executive Manager Singh.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just going to advise Council, you have to keep into consideration we're pretty unique in our area with the industries and the businesses within our heavy industrial area, and not as comparable to every municipality. There are some that are very similar to ours, so we'll do our best to bring a comparable back. So.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be the identical kind of pollutant that's in the water, but a sense of, You know, is there an attempt to use these fines as a deterrent, or is it not? Or, I mean, I get it if we're going to recoup our costs, that sort of mitigates a lot of the issue, I guess. But if someone thinks it's cheaper to try to get away with it and not get caught, then it's not much of a deterrent.
I think the conversation, a lot of great comments. I think that, you know, going back, this is spurred on by the new wastewater mechanical treatment plant. There's no question about it. We've had, as you have shown the pictures, the community has experienced it. It isn't great, but we've lived through it. But I think that the message to the community, businesses, residents, property owners, whatever you go down that drain will now have a massive effect when the new mechanical wastewater treatment plant comes into play. And as Councillor Diachuk alluded to, we're going to be dealing with membranes, millions of dollars, and an event such as when you run pure crude oil into the bioreactor, it's not going to be good. And we've already invested a significant amount of money to try and preempt that, but the same token, that's not the cure-all answer at the front and at the back end. So the need to help people understand. I agree with Councillor Buckingham's concerns about creating more regulation. I think you've alluded to that, Karen, as well, and mentioned it, that if it's a provincial federal regulation, it would work just hand in hand with the city rather than creating its own. So I appreciate that. I can see the city is definitely going to be the good guy, bad guy in this picture as we go forward, because I know businesses don't like more regulation, but the bottom line is, and this is going to affect every building owner, I believe, because as we talked about industry in this community, many businesses operate out of one building. And I think there's going to be onus put on building operators and building ownership to be responsible within their rental agreements and make it very clear and understanding, because Karen, you mentioned here the authority to disconnect provision of services. That affects the building. You could have 12 renters in your building and somebody is the bad apple and everybody's going to pay. So from that perspective, I think that, again, communication will be key, educating people as we go forward with this one. From the perspective, Karen, if I can ask, how do we disconnect provision of services? So basically we turn off their water tied to their sewer, because I'm not sure how we would disconnect their sewer service.
So, Your Worship, that is one option, is to disconnect their water for the time being, or we could also plug the sewer service and not allow discharge.
And basically render the facility useless because you don't have proper running water. Fair enough, and I think that is, I would hope that, and will be our last option, but I don't know how else you educate people that tend to let this happen. You know, as we've talked about, there is accidents, but there's going to be deliberates when people change something and say, oh, well, we'll just put a little bit down, and dilution is the solution. And in this case, dilution does not provide that solution, and especially heavy crude. Councillor Fagnan's comments about technology, I just encourage we continue to keep our eyes open, because, yeah, we've put in automated water meter reading, and we know that technology works very well. We've now got our lights working better with the automation there. If that technology shows up, I'd love to see it, because I think that would be our cure-all answer, because the sooner we can get to the point of contamination, get to the point of education, followed by fines. And again, I would support that the fine has to be significant enough that it's felt, because it costs money to bring a vac truck and suck it up and haul it for disposal. But it's got to cost more money if you put it in the wastewater system, because that affects everybody in this community and affects a facility that we're going to be very proud of when it's completed, but yet we can't take those chances, and people have to understand that. So, yeah, all good points around the table, and I think administration's got some great comments, and we're going to be back to it as council. We're going to have to sell this as well and help people understand how important it is, because we've just invested $81.5 million. That's kind of $30 million plus of taxpayers' money, businesses, residences, and we have to protect that infrastructure no matter what. That's the bottom line. Any other comments or questions for Karen? Thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Council.
With that, moving on to 5.2, City Manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. For 5.2, bylaw number 20-2021, text amendment to land use bylaw number 5/2016, warehouse sales in the I-2 district. I will ask Caitlin Luster to come forward and present.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and committee members.
Good afternoon, Caitlin.
I'm here today to talk to you about information pertaining to an application for a text amendment to land use bylaw number 5/2016 to allow for warehouse sales within the medium industrial I-2 district. The City of Lloydminster received a text amendment application on May 5th requesting that warehouse sales be included as a permitted use in the I-2 district. The applicant is in the process of purchasing an existing building located in the I-2 district. The purpose of this district, as described in the land use bylaw, is to provide for industrial uses that carry out a portion of their operations outdoor or require outdoor storage areas, and any nuisance associated with these uses should not extend beyond the boundaries of the site. The I-2 district presently includes permitted uses such as agricultural-oriented sales and services, vehicle and equipment sales and rentals, cannabis sales, and warehousing. Warehouse sales means development used for the wholesale or retail sale of a limited range of bulky goods from within an enclosed building where the size and nature of the principal goods being sold typically does require a large floor area for a direct display to the purchaser or consumer. Warehouse sales is currently a permitted use in the light industrial I-1 district, service commercial C5 district, and a discretionary use in the commercial shopping center C4 district. Administration completed a review of 7 comparable municipalities in Alberta and Saskatchewan. 5 of those municipalities did include warehouse sales or wholesale in their equivalent of the I-2 district. 1 of those municipalities included warehouse sales as a discretionary use in some commercial, mixed business, and rural business districts. The remaining municipality did not have this use in their land use bylaw. I can take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Questions, comments? I'll go with Councillor Whiting, Councillor Diachuk after that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't see any issues with this whatsoever in my mind. I think that it's, you know, it fits the area good and probably should have maybe been there beforehand, I think. There's not a whole lot, when I think of warehouse, or my understanding of the warehouse sale, there's not a whole lot of heavy traffic, heavy equipment use in the yard, or I believe it's more just kind of inside. Is it inside warehouse stuff, or does it also include piles of warehouse materials or stacking?
I suppose it could. The definition for warehouse sales does say within an enclosed building. I would assume there would be a forklift involved, but it shouldn't be beyond that much.
And it does, so it doesn't really include any, it's not outside items as well too then, so.
It shouldn't be, no.
Yeah, so, okay, good, yep.
Councillor Diachuk.
Thanks, George. Yeah, when I was looking at this and looking at the map, and I was just trying to wrap my head around this going, okay, similar to Councillor Whiting, I don't see a major change here, I guess. The only thing I was wondering about, when does a warehouse exceed the threshold and need a different level of approval? So is there kind of a gray zone in there, or is there, where are those zones in that? And I guess that's the only thing I was thinking about.
There are.
Am I making myself, do you understand what I'm getting at? So when does it stop being a warehouse and it's much, much bigger than a warehouse, and then you need a different zone?
Right. I don't believe we have anything like that. This is warehouse sales specifically. We do have warehousing already in the IT district, but warehouse sales would be just a large amount of goods. I would say it's probably at the high end already versus like a retail use. So it would be a large amount of bulky goods basically on display as a warehouse, if that makes sense. Yep. Did I answer that correctly or well?
Yeah, no, it's your answer. Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around, because I don't see any great big conflict. And I guess, and as we look at this and I see the examples, listed above and whatever, I'm going, okay, when would it stop fitting in there and need to move into another category? So that would kind of put some, parameters and brackets around it, but maybe it's an irrelevant question too, so.
Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Your Worship. You guys have been really good at this, and I don't see it in here. You guys in planning don't have any real issue with this from anything you've identified, any research you've done, or you'd have pointed it out in there. So as a team, you guys are comfortable with making a move like this.
Yes, that's correct.
And just before Facebook gets it, it's not Costco. I'm certain of it, because it'll hit Facebook tonight and it'll be Costco got approved at council today. Probably not Costco, just saying.
The applicant, if anyone is curious, is Indigo Wholesales. Indigo Wholesales. Yeah.
There you go, perfect. Any other questions or comments? Caitlin, I think, yeah, that was my question, because I'm looking at the businesses I see that I know exist in industrial too, and I'm going, okay, what, I would have almost, from my past, would have said they were warehouse sales. But what, that definition, because an oil field supply store is this, and an industrial supply store is this, manufacturer / distributor / reseller is this, and I think this is just one of those categories that just hasn't been added, in my opinion. Is that the way you're seeing it from basically the planning perspective?
I think initially why it wasn't included was to not muddy the industrial uses of
Okay.
the district, but I believe that wholesales, or rather warehouse sales, is appropriate.
Okay, no, and because I'm looking to, we all know where the industrial north of the tracks, if I want to use that term in some of the area, and I'm seeing some of that would be I-1 then, I would think, and commercial along the highway versus, because it's right adjacent to I-2, and like I say, in some cases, it almost seems like the businesses are almost all the same.
Right, it's very similar, yeah.
Okay, no, I would agree. I think this is just a good complement to our existing business. We have a large industrial area that's been set aside, a huge industrial park that could use a little bit of help, and if that helps attract some business as well, I think it's well in the interest of the community to do that. Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, just, my thoughts on this, and I don't know if, it must have been last term when we got some of those kind of applications where people were looking to do things in the industrial area that maybe felt a little less industrial, like a hair salon, things like that. And, the things I think about, when we're looking at those ones is like, okay, the foot traffic and stuff, there's no sidewalks and all the machinery moving around in that area. Is that really safe for the public? And our job being to protect the public as we do this and have thought out land use planning. To me, this type of thing would be you're traveling by vehicle, possibly by pickup truck or larger to go pick something up. What better use than industrial, especially wide turning, stuff like that. You maybe have a trailer on, based on what I understand to be warehouse sales. So to me, I think that the planning team hit it right this time for sure. So anyway, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I think you've got a good sense from council where we stand on that one. So if it's all right, I'll just move it to 5-3 through the city manager, back to you to carry on.
The second report I'm here today to present is to provide the committee with information pertaining to a text amendment related to home-based businesses and enforcement within the land use bylaw number 5-2016. This amendment was initiated by administration to address current issues and challenges regarding home-based businesses and to add a home-based business limited category, which was part of the business license lien project recommendations. The review process included examining the home-based business sections of 13 Alberta municipalities and 3 Saskatchewan municipalities of varying sizes. The review compared the current home-based business sections in the land use bylaw 5-2016 and the potential changes that could be implemented. Once this was established, city administration conducted a review of the potential changes to the land use bylaw to determine the most appropriate changes to be included in the proposed amendment, along with addressing enforcement when required of the home-based businesses. The home-based business section amendments include but are not limited to adding a home-based business limited category for home offices, which would not require a development permit, adding a list of uses that are not permitted as a home-based business, adding that for a home-based business minor or major in a cul-de-sac, a parking sign is required to direct the clients to the provided off-street parking, changing client visits for home-based business majors from 2 to more per day to 2 to 5 per day and no more than 25 in a 7-day period. To address enforcement concerns, administration is proposing to amend the land use bylaw by adding a definition for bylaw enforcement officer, delegating authority to the bylaw enforcement officers to enforce the land use bylaw by adding them as a development authority under Section 2, Development Authority Applications and Amendments, and adding a subsection specific to enforcement powers in Section 3, contravention and enforcement. I can take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. I think there's a couple of things here that I like. The red tape reduction piece on this one, getting rid of that development permit. You know, I went through this with my own, and I thought, I gotta get a development permit for that, right? So I think that there's some real merit to getting rid of that kind of thing. I mean, no one comes to my office at home. It just doesn't happen, right? So the fact that we needed a development permit seemed a little overkillish to me. So I think that's a really good thing. Interesting to add the off-street parking in a cul-de-sac location. We've had some comments on that, of course, as things have happened. Limiting that to 25 a week, as it says in here, right? So what does it say? It says major from 2 or more a day to 2 to 5, and no more than 25 in a 7-day period. Seems tough to enforce to me. Why is that there?
Why?
How would we ever know that?
Right. Enforcement, as Karen had pointed out in her previous presentation, is very difficult. You do need tangible evidence for a lot of enforcement. That being said, probably the best enforcement measure is just the public notifying us, so it is by complaint. Is that going to be hard to enforce? Potentially, it could be. But I think the idea behind it is to, at the very least, give an idea to the people that have these home-based businesses what they should be doing. Because we feel that beyond that, maybe you are better off in a retail space or a commercial space.
You know, because, you know, bylaws with teeth are fine, but this one, it seemed to me that it would be one of those things that I'm going to ask you 4 years from now, how many of these have we actually had to follow up on? And you'll say, well, we didn't find anybody for that. We suspect there may have been some, but we didn't, you know, so why have it there, right? So, but you're right. I understand that it gives the layout for someone so they can understand what's going on. So, but yeah, I just want to make sure that when we put something like that together, that you can actually do something about it. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just generally, I think that these are good amendments. You know, I agree that the enforceability of how prescriptive that is will be a very big challenge, and how you get there will be very challenging if ever you're trying to enforce that. Like most things, it likely is a conversation before someone ever gets to the 25 and says, hey, we notice there's a lot of frequency and it doesn't seem like it's really in line, so make adjustment. Anyway, but the point is, you know, a lot of businesses start out as small home-based businesses. As part of our economic development, we need to be able to promote that. Obviously, you know, the commercial area helps pay a lot of the bills in the city, but they start here and they grow into something that has multiple employees, employs people, and you know, so it's something that we need to be promoting and ensure that we have good practices to be able to get people from that point where it's an idea to it's a home-based business to it's a commercial space somewhere. And I think it's important that, you know, this step actually might make it easier for some. But also, it's important that, you know, neighborhoods are able to enjoy quiet enjoyment of their own space without nuisances. And we know that we've gotten emails where there has been nuisances over the years from home-based businesses that maybe are almost at the point where they belong in a commercial space. So I appreciate this because I think that it helps ease some of those frustrations for some of those individuals, but it also might be one of the things that helps move those individuals' businesses to the point where, you know what, maybe there's the confidence that I should be in a commercial space. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments? Certainly appreciate the bylaw enforcement, the amendments being proposed. I think that takes, because bylaw was working, I believe, with planning through our development officer, and so this now enhances the bylaw team to be able to act on if there is, they require to act. This will move the process ahead faster and certainly reduce that back and forth. I think that it's great, as it's been indicated, that we've eliminated some of the permitting process and things like that. So We want to encourage economic development, and as Councilor Thorson said, it often starts in a home-based business and grows in some cases. And if that's what it takes to help foster economic development in our city, I know that we're looking for jobs, we're looking for growth and the opportunities. And so many people start with a dream and may start in their own homes. So giving them that ability, I think, is great and helps us move that forward. So if there's no other questions, thank you very much. And I think you've got some direction again from council on that. And moving on to 5.4, City Manager.
Thank you, Your Worship. For 5.4, draft public art policy, I will ask Tracy Simpson to present.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council.
Good afternoon.
So we're here today to bring back a draft of the public art policy following our presentation council at GPC on May 10th. Following the May 10th GPC meeting, we took feedback from council and have presented the draft public policy that's before you today. This policy establishes guidelines for the donation and purchase of public art through a public art reserve. 1% of the annual capital surplus will be allocated to the public art reserve for the purchase, installation, maintenance, and removal of public art as needed. Following advice from the committee, as well as members of the public, the policy states that the city will take ownership over all public art acquired, and the art will become part of the Lloydminster Museum collection. Through this policy, a public art advisory committee will be created and will evaluate public art submissions based on a specific eligible criteria. This advisory committee will follow a terms of reference that will provide direction and an operating mandate within the city's regulatory guidelines. These terms of reference shall stipulate eligible requirements for our committee members, the roles and responsibilities of the committee, as well as the city, and reporting requirements of the committee to City Council. The initial responsibility of the committee will be to develop a detailed application and review process for all public art. So just going into a bit more detail on the policy. I'm not going to go through the whole policy, but I want to highlight a few sections for you today. So Section 8 talks about donated public art, and the city shall accept donated art based on recommendations from the committee. The city shall take over all copyright and moral rights of applicants for the donation of public art, meaning that we'll fully own the art and we can use it as we see fit for marketing, advertising, or city promotions. Given that we're taking over the ownership of the art, the city shall cover all costs for installation, maintenance, and removal of said art through the reserve that we've established. Section 9 speaks to the Public Art Advisory Committee and gives a bit more details of the makeup. So we're proposing that the committee shall be appointed by council on a 2-year term, and they can serve for 2 years and may extend by 1 term, so 4 years in total. The committee, with input from administration, will consider the eligibility criteria and the eligibility requirements as outlined in Section 10 of the policy, and the makeup of the committee will include 1 member of council, 3 members of administration, and 3 members of the public. The terms of reference will provide details on the qualifications and requirements of the 3 members of the public. In Section 10, the eligibility requirements, we provide some details on the application process and review at a high level, and these will be the guiding principles that the committee will use to establish the application and review process. So all submissions will come through the Office of the Community Development Services Executive Manager and will require we provide the information as follows in 10.1. The nature of the public art, information from the artist, the connection to the Lloydminster community, the size and dimensions, a requested location if they have one, reasons for the request, and a proposed maintenance plan. The committee will review and approve public art based on the following criteria. whether the public art has a historical or cultural value to the community, if it recognizes meritorious service, it contributes in a significant way to the development of the community or the region, or it is determined that the public art adds significant character or attractiveness to the city. .3 details some specific criteria that will deem the art ineligible, and that includes the exhibit has any form of discrimination, it's of a religious nature, of a political nature, or is attempting to influence government policy, contains any nude or sexual connotations of any kind, exhibits violent acts, or contains blood and gore. In nature, it's a for-profit purpose. It exhibits imagery containing alcohol, cannabis, or any other drug paraphernalia, or it involves any corporate branding. I'm available now for any questions regarding the policy.
Thank you, Executive Manager Simpson. Councilor Diachak.
Thanks, Your Worship. Thanks very much for bringing this forward. And I think it's an excellent start in terms of where we're at. There's some things, I guess, the ownership versus leasing it, as we've done in the past, I think is an important shift in how we're approaching this. The maintenance plan and 10.1.7, I guess, as a criteria, I guess if we don't have the space or the capacity to store a piece of art in a particular way, then we would say, no, we can't sustain it, or we can't really accept it in some way. So that would cover that part of it. Am I reading it right?
That's correct, Councillor Diachak.
And then the other thing on 10.2 is that I was just thinking about some of the stuff that I bought, watercolors and the artist, it's very abstract, yet it's just, for me anyways, it's personally very beautiful and aesthetically pleasing. Is that captured then in 10.2.4, that it adds character or attractiveness to the city? So I just want to make sure that, you know what, if Tracy goes and makes this painting, has nothing to do about history or any other thing other than it's just a beautiful painting, does it still qualify under 10.2.4?
Yes, that's I guess the gist of having 10.2.4 included as a criteria. That's going to be one of the harder categories, I guess, to adjudicate by the committee, because art is very subjective in nature.
Yes.
So we'll be looking towards the expertise on the committee to help us put some parameters around what that might look like.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Now, I'll preface this by saying, for whatever reason, I was extra crusty when we saw this last time around, at least talking about public art and how I wasn't a fan of whatever Calgary had and things like that, and how it was very controversial. You know, based on what I'm seeing in this plan in general, the overall cost, the way we're going to go about receiving, and whether or not we can actually afford to maintain or store or whatever, and all that's being done on the front end, you know, I think this is a great plan. I think it really is a good, solid plan. I think it hits all the right points in terms of what matters to Lloydminster. Like, we don't know what we're going to be receiving yet, but, you know, the historical significance, all those other things, you know, I think are really, are just hitting it the way we want it to. At the end of the day, there should be some portion of our budget that goes towards beautification, because beautification means that it's a more aesthetically pleasing community to be in, and generally speaking, that improves people's quality of life and attracts people to want to visit your community. So, you know, having something like this, I think, helps push us in that direction, so that at the end of the day, we'll have a nicer place to live, which will make people want to live and visit here. So, thank you.
Councilor Buckingham, Councilor Marion, and Councilor Diachak.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same vein there. I was lukewarm on this idea at all of purchasing anything in the form of artwork with taxpayers' dollars. I hadn't really got my head around that quite yet. The one thing I was looking at in here, or that I didn't see in here, and maybe it's assumed, is that the liability pieces. So if we had a large statue type thing that was donated and the committee accepted it, or we purchased it or whatever, I didn't see anything in the polity about the creator or the designer of this is not liable, or the city is liable for things that happen with it. And the last thing I would say is the budgeting around it, right? It's going to take a while to have any kind of reserve there at 1% of a capital surplus to purchase anything. And then that same money is supposed to pay for any thing that happens to it, so it's damaged and whatever, we have to pay that out. So those are my two questions. Do we have the right number there and the liability piece?
Yeah, so to the first question around liability, that was one of the reasons we shifted our focus to accepting full ownership of the art and talking to some artists in the community. There was a significant hesitation that they would be willing to put art on city land that they owned due to the liability. And so the city would take ownership of all the liability, and we'd be responsible for ensuring that whatever art it is, be it a sculpture or painting or anything, that it's properly installed, that it's safe, and that it causes no immediate danger to any member of the public. The one clause in the policy that allows us to remove public art at our discretion helps address that. If we review the application, we see their maintenance plan, we feel it's good, the committee makes a recommendation, we accept the art, we install it, and we see that it's causing more maintenance issues or creating liability issues, we can remove that art at our discretion or at our sole discretion, which helps reduce that liability. In terms of the funding, we wanted to start with the 1% allocation from the surplus as a good starting point. As per the policies around reviewing our legislative policies, we're giving it kind of the first 3 years of this policy to see how that works, and after 3 years we can reevaluate, you know, how that funding model worked. Was it enough? Was it too much? And we can reevaluate a more educated financial plan for public art at that point.
Yeah, I just, in trying to be good stewards of the city's finances, I have a hard time getting it from the nice to have to the need to have part in my head. Are these things nice to have, and does it add beautification to the city, and can we use it in tourism promotion and things like that? Absolutely. There's some real valid points there. But I'm still on the need to have, nice to have thing, and I'm just not there.
I've got Councillor Marin, then I'm going to go to Councillor Diachuk, then Councillor Whiting.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for bringing forward this very common sense, easy to understand and manage art policy. When I read it, I was like, "Ooh, that's fantastic!" And so yesterday I was buying this necklace, and it was made by a local artist, and she's donating all of the proceeds to support housing in our community for our most vulnerable populations. And so as we were talking, I was just reminded of the richness that the art community provides to our city and to the culture that we have here. And just thinking about, is it a need to have or a want to have? Well, I think we have to find balance. And so, do we need a new arena? Do we want a new arena? Do we need, a new court? Do we want a new court? Do we need art? Do we want art? And so I think it's part of, not everyone is a sports person in our community or involved in, some other form of recreation, but art is really, what their passion is and what sparks them. And so to bring a policy forward like this, to really say yes to an arts community that you're an important part of our culture and our community, I think is great. And I like the structure of the committee as well. I think that you'll get, some pretty good interest in being on that committee, and some really good insights from the community as well. I did have a question, but I don't even know what it is now. I think maybe someone has asked it already, but I don't know what it is. But good job. Thanks for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Diachuk.
Yeah, just a couple other things. I want to build on a notion that I think Vermilion has the mural walk, and we're amazed at the number of murals they have in their own community, and it's now part of their communities. And I know that in places we've traveled, there's always been an art walk or something you can go and see what the local artists are doing and get a sense of the flavor of the community. So I think it needs to be encouraged, and a lot of other cities are doing it in a far more committed kind of, with a concerted effort. So it not only is it just about seeing the art, but it's also promoting the art community itself and the opportunities for people within our community who have that aptitude, that ability to create art, whether it's two-dimensional or three-dimensional art. In terms of liability and the like, we have our Project Hope statue out here just by City Hall. I'm wondering how many times we've had to do any work on that statue since it was put up, and to my knowledge, probably none. So I guess I'm perhaps a little more optimistic, and maybe there's more significance to, you know, obviously the reference to the RCP and within the statute. But the other thing I think should be added here is a potential for community members to make donations to the fund. So if there are community members that want to contribute to the art fund, we should find a way to make that available in there. Because I would suspect that there are a number of, you know, just as you mentioned, I guess, Councillor Marin, how the individuals making the artwork contributing to, you know, the needs of the community from a social perspective. It's possible other artists will say that they want to contribute and support this as, you know, initiative within the community. And I guess I think back to retrospective on our local news station, and they had Russ Elmer espousing the virtues of having a theater in a community. And I bet you they had the same discussions about whether need to have, want to have. And yet I think about today, and most people would say that it's impossible for us to give up the victory of a theater. It's become such an important part. And there probably were a lot of naysayers at that point in time. So I think this is, I think we're on the right track from developing this broader kind of sense of a cultural arts community and moving it forward.
Executive Manager Simpson.
Thank you, Councillor Diachuk. So the ability to donate to the Public Art Reserve is actually in the policy in Section 7. All donations submitted to the city for public art shall be put in the Public Art Reserve for funds.
I didn't have a 7 on my.
Yeah, no problem.
Councillor.
Would they get a tax receipt for that? Or would our society then be, or how do we do that so that if there was an opportunity for them to be reimbursed with a tax receipt? I guess I'm just trying to think about the more motivation we can build into this, the better.
Our CFO just sent me a note that yes, donations can be accepted and they would get a charitable receipt.
Perfect. Can we add that in, that part of it, so people know that if they're reading this, that they can, just a thought.
For sure. We can make that amendment.
Councillor Whiting.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I guess I'm just interested in knowing what 1% of our capital surplus, what you think that would be. I know it would be, it would vary, I assume. What do you think that number is?
Well, it would vary year to year, depending on what the surplus is. This year, we carried, I don't remember how much our surplus was. Do you know?
That question was on my list, Councillor Whiting, so I was going to look to the CFO, and I see she's got her binder.
We should all have that number right off the top of our head,
Yeah,
right? That's
exactly right.
I want to say when we were looking at some comparable years, we were thinking 1% would be in that 20 to 30,000.
Yeah.
But it really does vary year to year.
Yeah, for sure. And that's, I think that's probably an accurate number.
Last year's, thank you for the question. Last year's 2020 year-end surplus allocation for capital, we had a surplus of 4 million, slightly over 4 million. So that was an unusually high year.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the previous year, but I know that it was less the previous year, and we will work to keep those down. So I would suspect we would monitor it and then come up with a policy about how to annually budget towards it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that would be my only comment is, 1% is a nice round number, and it looks good on paper, and for that particular year, is 40,000 more than enough? Is it enough? And then next few years, is it too? I don't know. So I guess monitoring it is definitely something that I would like to see. And I don't even know what public art costs, so I don't know how many years it would take to build up a surplus in order to make a purchase or accept a donation. And I assume that would maintenance costs come out of this reserve, as well as removal costs would come out of this reserve as well too for?
Correct. The intention would be that all costs related to public art be funded from the reserve.
Okay. Yep, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Whiting. Councillor Torson and Councillor Buckingham.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship.
Okay,
Actually, I was thinking about the 1% thing as we were kind of working our way around the table as well. And I just wonder, because you almost want at some point to get an okay balance in there to operate from. And if this year's, capital surplus ends up being $200,000 or something like that, you're not going to be able to get much done. So to me, I would actually just say minimum 1%, and then council, obviously, when the surplus comes through, would make a decision on where those surpluses are going when our CFO brings them to us as they're working on the year end. So that was my only comment, is just minimum 1%, and then we can make a decision as to whether or not it needs a little bit more as we're going through the process. I did have one other comment that is past me. All right.
We
Thank
can
you.
circle back if you'd like.
Yeah, that's fine.
You're good, I'll go to Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. Just for some perspective, and I think it's a little extravagant, we put the Hope statue together for $250,000. It was $250,000 that we fundraised to build that statue at the time. And that's probably a lot more than we're going to see in a public art donation or any kind of thing like that. And I don't necessarily see the city spending $250,000 on something like that, but that's what it cost to build at that time. However many years ago we put that there, 15 plus, something like that. And there has been very little maintenance that's had to have been done to it. It does require some specialized maintenance, not like a city staff would go out there and do it with the bronzing and all that kind of stuff, but it's been very minimal over that time, but it was $250,000 touch to put it there.
Thanks, Councillor Buckingham. I've got Councillor Marin and then back to Councillor Torson.
Thank you, Worship. Apparently it's contagious. But I remembered my question, and I should have just looked at my notes. So have you had any thoughts around how you can use art that's donated and that the city takes ownership of to build our economic development? So there's lots of research around using art, like Vermilion has the mural walk, Leduc has an art thing. There's many communities that have used art to really build that tourism or economic development. And so have you kind of looked at what that might look like in terms of new art installations in Lloydminster?
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor Marin, that's a great point. We see great potential to partner with the DARP committee that Jana presented about earlier to use art as part of then downtown enhancements. We also see it as potential for landmark recognition and attraction to some of our facilities and services. A lot of communities use public art as landmarks to help people reference in the community. And we do see great value. Through our research, we saw a lot of art walks and mural walks that we see has the potential to be added here in our community.
That's great. And just, sometimes that art can tell the story of a community, and I think that that's really, like the murals often do that. But just thinking about how do we use this art to really tell the story of our community and let people know what our community is like. Great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Councillor Torson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I remembered my other question, and it has to do with donations, sponsorship, as well as the clause that says that we will not involve corporate branding at all. So I'm wondering, are we leaving ourselves the opportunity to have the maintenance and upkeep of sponsorship or of artwork sponsored by a business? Small plaque, we are keeping this maintained just as part of it, in case there's that opportunity someone wants.
That's
You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And I'm saying, I understand what you're trying to say, which is if you're in Mundare and you see that big pierogi, it's not doesn't have chimo
Sausage.
printed on the side of it. Or sorry, sausage. What's the one with the pierogi? I was thinking of the pierogi. But anyway, it doesn't have chimo written on the side of it, which would be something totally different. But there could be a tiny plaque that says, sponsored by company whatever, that maintains it.
I think that's a good idea. I would take that comment back. I'll talk to our sponsorship team and see what they see as potential partnership opportunities for sponsored art versus corporate branded art.
I just don't want to take the ability away from sponsorship for maintenance.
I think there's some opportunities within our sponsorship policy to allow that, so we'll take a look at the wording and see how that could fit.
So I guess
There's also opportunity for a policy like this to spur interest in public art, and that companies or landowners can install their own public art and create our arts community, not just on public land, but on private land as well.
Well, even as you mentioned that, I don't know if anyone pays attention in the downtown hair studio downtown just installed a cool thing attached to their building, just a piece of public art, which I believe is the same artist that had presented to council before. So it's already starting, but it would be good if we can spur on more of it.
Councillor Dodchak.
Yeah, and I guess that Councillor Torsen's comment sort of caused me to think and go back to the discussion on a museum, because we have the Journey of the Bark Colonist Settlement Lloyd area, and we have the stage sold off at the Russ Ulmer stage at the Vic Juba, and I guess similarly is the option available at the museum if there's one area that's going to be, you know, that we can sell the naming of that. So it could be, you know, the Dion Pollard settlement of Lloydon area kind of. So I mean, he gives $2 million and he has naming rights for.
We would take that $2 million like that.
For 2 years. Yeah. But just a thought, because based on that piece as well. So.
For sure. I know Joel and his team, him and Natalie, are looking at what we consider sellable space in the museum. We haven't gone too far down on the details, but now that we have a design and the exhibit's moving along, it's something we're looking at.
Yeah, because there's one in there for the oil industry, and if we have a new sheriff in town, so to speak, the sheriff might be interested in having the name on that display.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to take a kick because a couple of my questions got asked. Thank you very much and answered. Item number 5, purchasing public art. The city shall purchase public art as per is that the City of Lloydminster procurement and purchasing policy?
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay, if we can add that, please, just for clarity. Going back to 10.3.8 involves corporate branding. I'm familiar that there, I believe at the museum today, some people would call it art. There's a cow that has a company's name on it that's no longer in business, as an example. Would that qualify now? And again, I think you heard the comments about corporate branding, just to be absolutely crystal clear, because that was donated by a company. There was quite a discussion, I believe, in the community and with administration how to deal with that. Now we have this policy. The cow, I still believe, is at the museum, tucked away in the back, and has some horns and chrome pipes on it and a few other things, and did visit downtown Calgary. So, you know, just as an example, I think that you will be surprised the number of things that might come up even that are at the museum today that have been gathered that aren't, I'd call museum, but that's where they ended up, and use that as an example. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Your Worship, that a lot of our artifacts in the museum have branding on it, whether they're still in business or not. And I think we'd have to maybe give some thought to the difference between an artifact of historical value versus public art.
That's right, and I think that's really what it comes down to. There's an artifact, and in that case, that particular cow was termed art. And there might even been some pigs. I'm not sure what we all collected over there, Dawn, in your past.
You'll have to repeat that, Your Worship, sorry.
I was just saying, in your past, you collected a cow, some pigs while you were in charge over all of the museum. What else is in there for potential art livestock?
Sorry.
There's some art that I believe that some people would call art, cattle, pigs.
I hear where you're going. I thought that's where you're going, but I just.
That's where I was
confirm
going.
that. Yes, I don't think that's in our possession anymore.
Oh, it's not anymore?
I'd have to, Joel would be the best.
Well, we'll
I've
do a
never
little
seen
searching.
it.
We'll do a little searching. I know we have a few items, not just artifacts, but some people determined as art, so
And I apologize for being
no
sidetracked.
problem. I know you were detailing something else, so it's all good.
Joel just informed me it's no longer at the museum.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. That took care of that problem. Thank you. I'll take that one away. I guess we need to find a new cow, you know, and I'm sure that somebody'd be more than glad to donate one, but it's going to cost us a lot of money. That beef's not cheap on the hoof right now, so. All right, is there any other questions around public art? I think the great discussion. Thank you very much, Executive Manager Simpson, for bringing that forward, and we'll look forward to the product with a few revisions.
Thank you.
Moving on to 5.5, and I'm going to turn to Councillor Torsen to open.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So just recently I was talking with the mayor in an agenda review committee, and we were just saying, you know, we should really maybe think about starting to do the acknowledging of the territorial grounds that we're on, the traditional territory that we're on. And it was an odd conversation because it's not within a policy anywhere, it's not within the procedure bylaw. So the question really becomes is how does something like this truly get brought up so that we can give direction to administration to adjust the agendas, to include something like that in the future. So that is kind of, how it came up with a lot of the things that's going on in the First Nations community right now, and recognizing our role as municipal leaders and how we play a role in reconciliation, as well as next Monday being National Indigenous Peoples Day. As a minimum, I thought it would be good for our municipality to at least acknowledge, the territory that we're on at the next council meeting. So I didn't know how we would do it to get that direction to administration to, prepare the proper statement to make sure that we are properly acknowledging our First Nations neighbors. I know as a community we do quite a bit already. The mayor, I know, has regular communications with the leaders in our area. I know there's the members who are on the Heart of Treaty 6 committee. You're going to find quite a few signatures from people around the table who actually signed on to that. The mayor, I know, was signed on, and I had to sign on behalf of the Public Library Board, or because of someone being absent, so I was happy to do so. So another thing is just mentioning our museum and cultural displays that we're doing. So either way, I think it's something important that we consider doing for the next meeting as a minimum, and possibly moving forward.
Thanks, Councillor. I'll look to the city clerk for comments, please.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you, Councillor. As Council is aware, the city is signatories to the Heart of Treaty 6 agreement, and within that agreement, we've committed to working towards reconciliation in many ways. If Council so chose to add a recognition of the Treaty 6 lands, in which we were holding meetings on prior to the start of a council meeting, it would not require an amendment of a bylaw. It would not require us to place anything into a procedure bylaw. It would just be council directing administration to do so, and we would make that happen.
Any other comments? Councillor Dutcher.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. I think as a council, it would be important for us to do something like that, and it would demonstrate leadership, I think, throughout the community as to our thoughts about the acknowledging what our role is and the efforts that the city is making towards truth and reconciliation. There was a speaker that was on CBC radio, I want to say it was Saturday, maybe it was Friday, but he was saying that part of the challenge in this whole process is and a very complicated process, is that we've moved from reconciliation being a verb to reconciliation being a noun. There's no end destination. It's a process, and it's an ongoing process, and people look for signals, they look for actions, they look for stories, they look for things that are being done to move us in that whole process in the act of reconciliation. I know that in the work that I do and in my job at the college, one of the things that we've talked about it is how do we make this declaration something meaningful, so it's not just I've read the 3 lines and I move forward and we carry on, because we can get caught up in simply repeating the 2 sentences, and it really doesn't mean anything after a while. So some of the things we're doing in particular with new faculty is that we're having someone do their interpretation of what the land acknowledgement means and what it means for them going forward in terms of their role, and to personalize it and to begin to share those stories, and be an opportunity for this mayor and council to talk about their own experiences and take that 30 seconds or 40 seconds as to what does that mean. And so I think, hearing the message from the leadership within the community, that I think would go a long way. We don't have to do it every meeting, but I think we could sort of space it out. So perhaps, we do the acknowledgement, then maybe just on GPC. Then we have individual, presentations by councillors to speak to whatever that treaty land acknowledgement means for them. So I think it's important, and I've talked to other people that are on Truth and Reconciliation Committee, the Hot Six, and it appears we've reached kind of a threshold in terms of all the things we're doing, and we're stagnating a bit. The good news is obviously we're hiring a person. The ad's out now, I think. But there's a need for something more to move this forward. And certainly the news we've heard out of BC and other places, and I think this is going to be dominating the news cycle for some time to come. relative to where we're at as a community, and I think this would be an important thing for us to do.
Any other comments? Councillor Marin.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Councillor Diachuk, for that, and Councillor Torson for putting this on the agenda today. I think we've talked about it briefly before, and then when you said it today, I was like, oh, yes, we really wanted to have that conversation, so thank you for that. In my work in Alberta, when we're doing workshops or starting, conferences, et cetera, we're always looking at how do we honor the land and the territory that we're on, and so I love that you said about our experience and how we're connected to that, because that's really what it is. When we talk about getting to the heart of it, that's important, that we actually ourselves have this belief, and this is what we want to do for reconciliation. So I think the other important thing would be to engage with our First Nation and our Indigenous people, our Métis people, to see what's important for them. How do they want the land acknowledgement to be, and so that we can have that included in what we do in practice here.
City Clerk, I think you'd like to make.
Yeah, if council so is engaged, we can work with our communications team, come up with the appropriate opening that would honor both the Indigenous people and the spirit of the Heart of Treaty 6. Bring that forward. By no means would it be a final. We can. It's an ongoing honoring. So if we had to adjust it, we could. But we can work with those groups and find out what they feel would be appropriate as well.
Thank you, and I just want to say how important that is, because I do this work in Alberta, but I work in Lloydminster as well, and I was meeting with, doing some workshops with the Aboriginal Head Start staff, and started with a land acknowledgement, and I paused right in the middle of it and said, I don't think I have this right for you. And so let's figure this out together. What would that look like? And so I think that kind of engagement is really important if we want to make sure that we're doing this well.
Thanks, Councillor. I think that we'll come back to city administration through communications, and certainly reaching out to our partners at the Heart of Treaty 6 to ensure that we are inclusive without, and I think that I appreciate Councillor Diachuk's comments. I think the GPC would be a great place for that opportunity, just to, again, continue to bring that forward on a regular basis, and start council meetings with a very brief introduction, if that's what we so choose, and go that way, so that it is there, but not at certain points fitting the meetings more better in certain places than others. Any other comments? With that, I will ask for inquiries from the media. Thank you very much. I will look for a motion to recess. Councillor Diachuk, seconded by Councillor Fagnan. Thank you. All in favor? Carried.